With war engulfing the globe, the odds of the US having to enter an international conflict once again is something that might keep you up at night. But what if we told you that one of the greatest threats to the United States comes from inside the country? That threat is a 2,350-mile stretch of water that runs through 10 American states and is one of the most important natural resources of the US, the Mississippi River. How could this vital river be a ticking time bomb rather than a blessing? We answer that question in this video as we explain why the Mississippi is America's Achilles heel. America and its economy relies on the Mississippi. It's one of the waterborne arterial highways of the US, with the upper Mississippi alone seeing around 175 million tons of freight navigating its waters annually. And that's not all. In 2019, the whole river carried a staggering 500 million short tons of exports, imports, and domestic freight per year, making it a key part of the trade connection that the US has with the rest of the world. It's also important to note that trade is not the most important thing the Mississippi offers. It's also invaluable to American livelihood. For over 2 centuries, the Mississippi Basin has been a hotbed of agricultural activity, with the businesses that operate in the basin being responsible for 92% of America's agricultural exports. While that's important from a trade perspective, domestically, that basin accounts for over half of all of America's agricultural land, with the river also feeding into a network of 250 other rivers. Simply put, those waters are vital to keeping America running. But as you'll discover in a moment, those same waters could also spell the country's demise. Climate change has already done a real number on the Mississippi River, and it threatens to make the waterway even more dangerous in the future. Since 1958, climate change has led to a 27% increase in precipitation in the southeastern United States, with much of that extra rain flowing directly into the Mississippi. There's a clear trend toward heavier rainstorms affecting the river, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and the floods that result from this climate change threaten to leave Mississippi cities like Vicksburg and Natchez vulnerable to greater inland flooding in the future. We already saw the impact of this in May of 2011. During that month, NASA recorded the river rising to just over 54 feet, less than 2 feet shy of the all-time record of around 56 feet recorded in May of 1927. In that 1927 flood, the river reached a width of almost 80 miles in some areas of Vicksburg. A levee failed, allowing the river's floodwaters to reach towns almost 60 miles away from the riverbed. Thousands of homes and businesses were destroyed, with crops being waterlogged in the process. The 2011 flood surpassed the 1927 flood in terms of its crest, with the waters eventually rising to around a staggering 57 feet. Those types of problems are only going to be exacerbated as the climate continues to warm. And frankly, the US is going to suffer as a result. In May of 2019, the Mississippi flooded again, with Scientific American placing the cost of the damage at $12.5 billion, roughly equivalent to $1 billion in damage for each of the 12 major cities the floods affected. And that is far from the only Mississippi flood to cause massive economic damage. A similar flood in 1993 cost the nation $21 billion. And the floods are getting more frequent. Between 2014 and 2019, the river flooded 4 times, each with the potential to cause billions of dollars in damage. As that frequency increases, we can expect the flooding of the Mississippi to become an annual event that destroys crops, hurts businesses, and forces untold numbers of repairs in American cities. And that's not even the worst of it. Droughts are just as much of a problem for the Mississippi. Water levels in the lower part of the river have been dropping since July of 2024, 8 feet below their historic average. Combine these floods and droughts, and you get a lethal combo with the potential to destroy crops, shatter businesses, wreck the U.S. economy, and, at their worst, kill thousands of people. The Mississippi flood of 1927 killed between 250 and 1,000 people alone, while displacing 700,000 more. But it gets worse. The Mississippi River is governed by a series of locks and dam structures. There are 29 of these structures in the upper Mississippi alone, with the locks and dams creating a stairway of water that allows barges and pleasure boats to safely sail through the river's waters. These dams are really starting to age. Most were built between 1930 and 1940, with engineers at the time believing their lifespans would be about 50 years. We're now close to a century away from those original construction dates, and the dams are still operating thanks to the Army Corps of Engineers making routine repairs every year. The question is, how much longer can they hold out? Many of these dams still have original parts that are more than 90 years old. What happens if one of those dams breaks? Well, the Upper Mississippi Lock 25 project, which was supposed to add a new lock and dam to the river, was supposed to be fully funded. The last estimate in 2018 was around $730 million, though it looks like the project will need at least an extra $332 million for completion. That's just over $1 billion for a single lock and dam. Now, imagine what happens if the 90-plus-year-old locks and dams currently holding the Mississippi waters all go down. That's a very strong possibility, given their age and the decades of funding neglect that has gone on. But replacing all 29 locks and dams would add up to over $30 billion, and that's assuming the Lock 25 project doesn't require more money. This financial black hole is compounded by what happens when a dam breaks: catastrophic flooding, as the water is suddenly released all at once. Any population center downstream of the river would be at risk of devastating property and environmental damage, along with loss of life. Just how bad the effects would be are unknown, as none of the Mississippi's dams has broken yet. This torrent of floodwaters would also accelerate the eroding of the Mississippi's banks. Research conducted in the 1990s found that the wakes produced by high-powered motorboats accelerated the natural erosion of the river's banks at a rate of between 2 and 14 feet per year. Imagine what the rushing water flowing down from a shattered dam could do. Most of the 130 bridges that cross the Mississippi River would be at risk, either being consumed by the floodwaters and collapsing, or being damaged structurally to the point where they require costly repairs. The 500 million tons of trade that flows through the river each year would slow to a crawl. Around 60% of America's grain simply would not get to where it needs to go, creating the risk of famine. How could it possibly get worse for the Mississippi? Well, we can throw ice into the equation to create yet another risk both to the American economy and the lives of sailors who have to brave the river. In January of 2020, an ice jam in the Mississippi caused localized flooding in Anoka and Champlin in Minnesota. This is a rare occurrence for the river. Its sheer width makes ice jams less frequent than in rivers that are narrower, shallower, and have more bends. Still, this single jam led to water at the Anoka City Dam elevating and led to flooding of the Ferry Street Bridge, as well as a pedestrian path. But if the Mississippi isn't as prone to these jams, why would they represent such a massive problem? The answer is that it's not necessarily jams that are going to cause big problems for the Mississippi. It's climate change melting more of the river's ice cover. Studies suggest that the Mississippi will lose most of its ice cover if climate change continues at the same rate it is today. And we're already seeing the effects of this issue. Ice is disappearing from the southern portions of the river, or it's icing off earlier than it used to. As the ice melts earlier and faster than it should, it can contribute to jams. In March of 2024, Wisconsin experienced the warmest winter it has on record, almost 10 degrees warmer than the 3-month winter average of 18.5 degrees for the region. The result was a January deep freeze of the part of the Mississippi that flows through the state, followed by a rapid warm-up that forced the ice to quickly float downstream. Float is the key word here. Conservation staff in Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri all reported seeing stretches of pancake ice and ice flows, which are both rare in those sections of the river. That has the potential to wreak havoc on shipping schedules, and portions of the river that don't usually have to deal with ice may face raised water levels. So what really makes the Mississippi River the Achilles heel of the United States? The simple answer is that so much trade flows through the river, any changes to it threaten serious economic and social impact. Flooding has become more common. The 2019 flood caused $12.5 billion in damages alone, in addition to creating high currents and the closure of locks. These both affected commercial shipping. Add droughts in some parts of the river and the terrible state of its locks and dams, and you have a powder keg waiting to explode. Then, add a healthy dose of climate change into the mix. Ice jams will become more common due to ice melting faster and earlier than it should. It all adds up to a river that has the potential to cost the US billions of dollars in the coming years. But what do you think? Are we maybe taking this a little too seriously? Or are there some things we may have missed along the way? Let us know your thoughts and comments below, and as always, thanks for watching and take care out there.